This week on Star Trek Discovery, Captain Burnham is just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him not to blow up a space thing. This is a review of Rubicon, the 9th episode of Star Trek Discovery's 4th season. If you're watching this before you've seen the episode, don't worry, this review is spoiler-free. Well, I say it's spoiler-free, but I did just tell you the title of the episode, and if you're familiar with history or the meaning of idioms, that's kind of a spoiler in and of itself. Why'd they have to spoil the episode with a thematically relevant title? God! Anyway, this was a good episode. Not as good as the best episodes of this season so far, which I'd still say are Anomaly, the 2nd episode, and Stormy Weather, the 6th episode, but better than last week's acceptable but listless exercise in treading water. There's some forward progression of the plot of the season-long story arc here. There are some important character beats for a few members of the cast, and there are a couple of hooks dropped at the end that set things up nicely for the next episode. One problem this episode dealt with, which I was very glad to see, was the character of Tarka. When he was introduced earlier in the season, Tarka was positioned as kind of a wild card. Yes, he's the asshole genius, which is a character type that can wear out its welcome very quickly, but his appearance in the show was of interest because he seemed to bring a destabilizing presence. His plans were big and bold and carried the potential for disastrous fallout. His motives, which we know a little something about, but most other characters in the show don't, are mysterious and personal, and his loyalty seemed to be ultimately only to himself. And yet, in the last episode, and for most of this episode, Tarka's just kind of been there, standing to the side while Book and Burnham navigated through their story. I was sitting there watching this week's episode thinking, Tarka's got to do something. Tarka's got to do something. And lo and behold, Tarka does something. He throws a wrench in the works. He turns the whole thing upside down. Actually, what he does isn't that shocking. It's pretty much what you were probably expecting him to do at some point if you've been watching the show. But the point is, he does it. It disrupts the other characters' plans. It pushes the story forward. And it has unintended consequences for Tarka himself, which is great because he's wanted to do a thing so he could get a thing. And he finally does the thing, but doesn't get the result he expected, which leaves him at a point of uncertainty at the end of the episode. What's he going to do next? That's a very good place for that character to be at this point in the season. So, well done to the writers for getting Tarka back. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for all of the characters in the show. I know I've mentioned this before, including more than once in my reviews for this season, but we really don't know very much about most of the bridge crew of Discovery, and whenever the show does decide to turn its focus on those characters, it only highlights how little we know about them. In this episode, there's a brief scene where Reese and Bryce have an argument, and it just feels like two randomly selected characters fighting about nothing. And it's not because what they're fighting about isn't important. They're arguing about one of the central moral dilemmas of the season, or at least of the last few episodes. The subject of the argument matters, but until this scene, we've had no sense that either of these characters have felt any sort of way about that subject or had any reason to feel any particular way about it. All of a sudden, in the middle of a mission, Reese is like, man, I'm not into this. Starfleet is fucking up. And Bryce comes back at him like, no, it's not. What Book and Tarka want to do, that's what's fucked up. It feels like they were each assigned a side of the argument right before the scene started. And it feels that way because we don't actually know them. It seems like the writers of Discovery recognize that the lack of characterization for most of the bridge crew is a problem, which is good, But they keep trying to take shortcuts to develop those underserved characters with scenes like Reese and Bryce's argument, or with the random bits of backstory characters have blurted out in a few episodes this season, and that's just not gonna do it. On a series like this with a big ensemble cast, characterization takes time, especially for characters like these who aren't the stars of the show. We don't need them to be as deep or as fully realized as, say, Saru, but we need to at least have a sense of who they are. And we don't. The only exception to that, for me, is Detmer, who actually got a character arc last season that enabled us to get to know her a little. Of course, she's done nothing of note this season so far, but as I said, this is a consistent problem with the show. Speaking of Saru, we get a couple of scenes with him that are not directly connected to the main plot, that serve to remind us of a side story he's involved with. I appreciated that, because it's a side story I'm intrigued by. Nothing new really happens, nothing is moved forward, but it's just a couple of scenes in there to make sure we don't forget that this is a thing. I'm fine with that. The thing about serialized storytelling is that you don't need to devote a big block of every episode to every ongoing story. Sometimes, usually, in fact, for secondary stories like the one I'm talking about, all you need is just a scene to nudge things forward a bit, or at least to keep that story in the audience's mind, to let us know it's still happening, that there's still a payoff coming. The setup for this episode's main story felt very TNG-like. The plan was to engage with Book and Tarka, not to attack, not to overwhelm, but to de-escalate. It's a very Captain Picard plan. Sometimes when you have your characters lay out a plan, you do so that they can encounter obstacles, but eventually overcome those obstacles and carry out their plan successfully. Other times, you have your characters lay out a plan so you can then have that plan completely derailed, leaving your characters in a position of having to figure out what they're going to do next. Either way can work, if done right. I'll just say that I was pleased by the choice Discovery's writers made for this episode. We have 4 episodes to go in this season. It feels like something big should happen in the next episode or 2, which would still leave a couple of episodes before the end of the season. Hopefully that means this season won't suffer from the save everything for the very end problem that has affected it in previous years, but we'll see. When this episode was over, I was interested in what happens next. And as I've said many times before, for me, that is the most important thing, because it means I'm invested. Am I dying to see what happens next? Am I on the edge of my seat with anticipation? No, but I'm interested. I'm there. And that's important. Those are my thoughts about this episode. Let me know what you thought. But remember, my review was spoiler-free, so if you're going to include spoilers in your comments, please include a spoiler warning so that folks who haven't seen the episode yet can avoid spoilers if they want. If you want to support my channel, go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron, or click the join button to become a member. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for a review of episode 10.